The Dhammapada, Chapter 19, Dhammaṭṭha Vagga, the just or righteous. Verse 256. The just should make a proper investigation. Natena hoti dhammaṭṭho yen-atthaṃ sahasa naye yocha atthaṃ anatthaṃ ca ubho niccaya pandito. He is not just if he decides a case arbitrarily. The wise man should decide after considering both what is right and what is wrong. Verse 257. The impartial are called the true justices. Asahasena dhammena samena nayati pare Dhammas gutto medhavi Dhammaṭṭhoti pavucchati. The wise man who decides not arbitrarily, but in accordance with the law, is one who safeguards the law. He is called one who abides by the law. The judges who took bribes. One day, some bhikkhus were returning to the monastery after their alms round in Savatthi. While they took shelter in a hall of justice during a heavy shower of rain, they saw some judges who were deciding their cases arbitrarily after having taken bribes. They reported the matter to the Buddha, who said, "Bhikkhus, if one is influenced by monetary considerations in deciding cases, he cannot be called a just judge who abides by the law. If one weighs the evidence intelligently and decides a case impartially, then he is to be called a just judge who abides by the law." Verse 258. One is not deemed wise because one is garrulous. Natena pandito hoti yavata bahu bhasati khemi averi abhayo panditoti pavucchati. He is not a wise man just because he talks much. Only he who is peaceful, free from enmity, and does no harm to others is called a wise man. Those who disturb others are not wise. Once there was a group of bhikkhus who always caused trouble at mealtimes, whether they were in the monastery or in the village. One day, those bhikkhus harassed some samaneras and said boastfully, "Look, we alone are intelligent. We alone are wise." Then they started behaving in an unruly manner and left the monastery in a mess. When the Buddha was told about this, he said, "Bhikkhus, I don't say that one who talks too much, abuses or bullies others is a wise man. Only he who is free from hatred and harms no one is a wise man." A note from the author. According to Buddhism, paññā or wisdom is the right understanding of the nature of the world in the light of transiency or impermanence, anicca, unsatisfactoriness or suffering, dukkha, and insubstantiality, anatta. Therefore, knowledge is of three kinds. First, suttamaya paññā, knowledge or wisdom acquired through learning. Chintamaya paññā, knowledge or wisdom acquired by thought and thinking and pondering. And 3. Bhavanamaya paññā, which is the superior kind of knowledge or wisdom acquired through meditation and contemplation. It is through such meditation that one realizes intuitive truths and insights which are beyond logical reasoning. Wisdom is the apex of Buddhism. It is the first factor in the Noble Eightfold Path, Sammaditthi. It is one of the 7 factors of awakening, Dhamma Vichaya Sambojjhanga. It is also one of the 4 means of accomplishment, or Vimamsa Iddhipada. It is also one of the 5 powers, or Panyabala, and one of the 5 controlling faculties, Panyindriya. It is wisdom, therefore, that leads to purification and to final deliverance, Nibbana. Verse 259. Talkativeness is not a characteristic of one who knows the Dhamma. Natavata Dhamma dharo yavata bahu bhasati yocha appangpi sutvana Dhammankayena passati save Dhamma dharo hoti yo Dhammang nappamajjati. One is not versed in the Dhamma merely because one speaks too much. He who hears little and sees the Dhamma mentally and deeply, and who does not neglect the Dhamma, is indeed versed in the Dhamma. Knowledge is not realization. Ekudana. Once there was a bhikkhu by the name of Ekudana who lived in a grove near Savatthi. He knew only one stanza of exaltation from the Udana by heart, but he fully understood the meaning of the Dhamma as conveyed by the stanza. Whenever the occasion arose, he would exhort others to listen to the Dhamma, and he himself would recite the stanza he knew. Every time he had finished his recitation, the guardian spirits or the devas of the forest praised him and applauded him resoundingly. On one occasion, 2 learned monks who were well versed in the Tipitaka, accompanied by a group of bhikkhus, came to his place. Ekudana asked the 2 monks to preach the Dhamma. They inquired if there were many who wished to listen to the Dhamma in this remote area. Ekudana told them that even the guardian spirits of the forests would applaud at the end of each discourse. So the 2 learned monks took turns to preach the Dhamma. But when their discourses ended, there was no applause from the guardian spirits of the forests. The learned monks were puzzled, and they doubted the words of Ekudana. But he insisted that the guardian spirits always applauded at the end of each discourse. The 2 learned monks then requested him to do the preaching. Ekudana held his fan in front of him and recited the usual stanza. At the end of the recitation, the guardian spirits applauded as usual. The bhikkhus who were accompanying the 2 learned monks felt that the deva inhabiting the forests were showing favoritism to Ekudana. They reported the matter to the Buddha on arrival at the Jetavana monastery. The Buddha admonished them, "Bhikkhus, I don't say that a bhikkhu who has learnt much and talks much of the Dhamma is one who is versed in the Dhamma. One who has only learnt very little and knows only one stanza of the Dhamma, but fully comprehends the 4 noble truths and is ever mindful, is the one who is truly versed in the Dhamma." Verse 260. Gray hair alone makes not a Thera. Natena Thero hoti yenassa palitang siro paripakko vayotassa mogha jinnoti vucchati. He is not thereby an elder or Thera merely because his head is gray. He who is ripe only in years is called one grown old in vain. Verse 261. He is a Thera who is stainless. Yang hi satyancha dhammocha ahimsa sanyamo dhammo savevanta malodhiro Thero iti pavucchati. Only a wise man who comprehends the Four Noble Truths and the Dhamma, who is harmless and virtuous, who restrains his senses and has rid himself of moral defilements, is indeed called a Thera. Age is not the criterion. One day, a group of bhikkhus came to pay respects to the Buddha. He knew that the time was ripe for those bhikkhus to attain arahanthood. So he asked them whether they had seen a certain elder as they came into the room. They replied that they did not see any such elder, but they only saw a young novice monk. Whereupon the Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, that person is not a novice monk. He is an elder. I don't call one an elder just because he is old. An elder is one who comprehends the Four Noble Truths and does not harm others." Verse 262. Handsome appearance does not make one good-natured. Na vakkarana mattena vanna pokkarata yava sadhurupo naro hoti issuki machari satho. Not by fine talk, nor by good looks is one considered good-hearted, if he were jealous, selfish, and deceitful. Verse 263. Good-natured is he who has given up jealousy, etc. Yassa chetang samucchinnang mula gacchang samuhatang savantadoso medhavi sadhu rupoti vucchati. A wise man who has cut off, uprooted, and removed these, and has rid himself of moral defilements, is indeed called a good-hearted man. Pretending to be what they are not. At the monastery, it was customary for young bhikkhus and samaneras to attend on senior bhikkhus who were their teachers. They washed and dyed the robes, or else performed other small services for their teachers. Some bhikkhus, noticing these services, envied the senior bhikkhus. They wanted to be treated just like them. So they suggested to the Buddha that young bhikkhus and samaneras should come to them also for further instruction and guidance, even though they had been taught by their teachers. The Buddha, knowing well their motive, turned down the suggestion and admonished them. Bhikkhus, I don't say that you are good-hearted just because you can talk eloquently. Only he who has got rid of all covetousness and all that is evil by following the holy life is to be called a good-hearted man. Verse 264. A shaven head does not make one a monk. Namundakena samano abbato alikang bhanang Icha loba samapanno samano king bhavissati. Not by a shaven head does an undisciplined man who utters lies become a monk. How can one who is full of desire and greed be a monk? Verse 265. He is a monk who has overcome evil. Yocha sameti papani anumthulani sabbaso samitattahi papanang samanoti pavucchati. He who wholly subdues evil deeds, both small and great, is called a monk, because he has overcome all evil. The monk who liked to argue, Hattaka. Venerable Hattaka used to argue with others. Whenever he was defeated in an argument, he would challenge his opponents to meet again at a certain place and time to continue with the argument. He would then go to the appointed place before the appointed time and declare that the absence of the opponent meant acknowledgement of defeat. He would then boast, "Look, those foolish people dare not meet me. They have been defeated by me." The Buddha, on hearing about his behavior, admonished Hattaka, "Bhikkhu, why do you behave in this way? One who says such things is not suitable to be a samana or a monk, in spite of his shaven head. Only one who has rid himself of all evil and pride is to be called a samana." Verse 266. One does not become a bhikkhu merely by seeking alms. Natena bhikkhu hoti yavata bhikkhate paro visang dhammang samadaya bhikkhu hoti natavata. He is not thereby a bhikkhu merely because he seeks alms from others. By following the whole code of morality, one certainly becomes a bhikkhu and not merely by seeking alms. Verse 267. He who is holy is called a bhikkhu. Yodha punyancha papancha bahitva brahmacharyava sankhaya loke charati save bhikkhuti vucchati. He who has transcended both merit and demerit, he who leads a pure life, he who lives with understanding in this world, he indeed is called a bhikkhu. Who is a bhikkhu? Once there was a Brahmin who was in the habit of going round for alms. One day he thought, "It is a common belief that one who lives by going round for alms is a bhikkhu. That being so, I should also be called a bhikkhu." So thinking, he told the Buddha that he should also be called a bhikkhu. The Buddha replied, "Brahmin, I don't call one a bhikkhu simply because he goes round for alms food. One who professes false views and acts unwholesomely is not a bhikkhu. Only he who lives meditating on the impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and insubstantiality of the aggregates is to be called a bhikkhu." Verses 268 and 269. Silence alone does not make a sage. Namone na muni hoti mulharupo aviddasu yocha tulamba paggayaha varang adaya pandito papani parivajjeti samuni tena samuni yomunati ubho loke muni tena pavucchati. Not by silence alone does he who is dull and ignorant become a sage, but that wise man who, as if holding a pair of scales, embraces the best and shuns evil is indeed a sage. For that reason, he is a sage. He who understands both worlds is therefore called a sage. Silence is not wisdom. Some ascetics who were not followers of the Buddha would say a few words of blessing to those who offered them food or other things. They would say, "May you be free from danger. May you prosper and get rich. May you live long." At that time, bhikkhus of the Buddha would remain silent after receiving something from their lay disciples. This was because during the first 20 years after Buddha's attainment of Buddhahood, they were advised to be silent on receiving offerings. The people began to compare the ascetics and the bhikkhus and commented, "We receive words of blessing from the ascetics, but the venerable bhikkhus just depart in silence." The bhikkhus reported the matter to the Buddha, who advised them to do likewise and utter a few appropriate words of blessings to their supporters after receiving offerings. As a result of that, people were able to develop confidence and satisfaction on hearing the kind words of blessing from the bhikkhus, whom they respected. Then the ascetics of some other doctrines remarked with disdain, "We adhere to the practice of the muni or sage and keep silent, whereas the followers of Samana Gotama go about delivering discourses in public places." On hearing those disparaging remarks, the Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, there are some who keep silent because they are ignorant and timid, and some who keep silent because they don't want to share their profound knowledge with others. Thus, one does not become a muni or sage simply by keeping silent. Only one who has overcome evil is to be called a muni or a sage." Verse 270. By harmlessness one becomes a noble or Ariya. Natena Ariyo hoti yena panani hinsati ahimsa sabba pananang ariyoti pavuchati. He is not, therefore, an Ariya or noble if he harms living beings. Through his harmlessness towards all living beings is he called an Ariya, a noble. Live up to the name, Ariya. Once there was a fisherman named Ariya who lived near the north gate of Savatthi. One day, through his supernormal power, the Buddha knew that the time was ripe for the fisherman to attain the first stage of sainthood. So, on his return from his alms round, the Buddha, followed by the bhikkhus, stopped near the place where Ariya was fishing. When he saw the Buddha, the fisherman threw away his fishing gear and came and stood near the enlightened one. The Buddha then proceeded to ask the names of those bhikkhus in his presence, and finally asked the name of the fisherman. When he replied that his name was Ariya, the Buddha said that the noble ones, Aryas, do not harm any living beings. But since the fisherman was taking the lives of fish, he was not worthy of his name. He immediately understood that the Buddha was urging him to renounce his harmful way of life and to take up the practice of compassion and loving kindness for all living beings. Verses 271 and 272. A bhikkhu should not be contented until he destroys all passions. Nasi labbata mattena bahusachena vapuna athava samadhi labhena vivicha sayanena va husami nekhamma sukhang aputujjana sevitang bhikkhu vissasang apadi appatto asavakkayang. not only by mere morality and austerities, nor again by much learning, nor even by developing mental concentration, nor by secluded lodging, thinking, I enjoy the bliss of renunciation not resorted to by the worldling. Not with these should you, O Bhikkhu, be content, without reaching the extinction of the corruptions. It is not easy to become an arahant. Once there were some bhikkhus who were endowed with virtue, some who had strictly observed the austere practices of Dhutangas, and some who had achieved the third stage of sainthood. All of them thought that since they had achieved that much, it would be quite easy for them to attain arahanthood. With this thought, they went to see the Enlightened One, who asked them, Bhikkhus, have you attained arahanthood? When they replied that they were in such a condition that it would not be difficult for them to attain arahanthood, the Buddha admonished them, Bhikkhus, just because you are endowed with morality or sila, and because you have attained anagami, or the third stage of sainthood, you should not be complacent and think that there is only a little more to be done. Unless you have eradicated all mental defilements or asavas, you must not think that you have realized the perfect bliss of arahanthood.